It is in front of me. I intend to fry it and eat it later. Ha ha. It has taken me 3 days to recover. It did not taste like fresh bacon, but I enjoyed it, nevertheless. She ripped like a ripe peach. I will not feel guilty. It is the whoring bitch to blame, not I. I've left the stupid fools a clue which I'm sure they will never solve. Once again I've been clever, very clever. 1 ring, 2 rings, a farthing, 1 and 2. Along with M, ha ha, will catch clever. Jim, it's true, no pill left but 2.
Inspector Joseph Chandler was one of the first officers at the scene. Apart from a leather apron that belonged to the son of one of the tenants, Chandler discovered a piece of screwed-up paper and a piece of torn envelope. The paper contained 2 pills, and on the envelope, written in a man's hand, the letter M. At 6:30, the body was removed. It was now that he noticed the contents of the deceased's pockets, which were lying in an apparently neat pile. Popular accounts exaggerated the find as a pile of rings and coins. And although 2 brass rings had been wrenched from her fingers, the rest of her meagre possessions amounted to no more than 2 combs, a piece of coarse muslin, and, almost certainly, 2 farthings.
1 ring, 2 rings, a farthing, 1 and 2.
An interesting factor about his relationship, for example, with his wife. He tells us when he's thinking of the children that he's going to force out all thoughts of the children and just think about his wife when he's actually going to do the killings. So naturally one would expect that the victims, the more akin to his wife, the more they look like his wife, the more they resemble her, the more they would be a suitable victim. And yet here he is in one of the killings where he tears the rings off the fingers because they remind him of his wife. Part of him that feels sexually aroused by his wife is in love with his wife, and yet part of him hates. And if the victim is too close to his wife, there's too much a reminder of that, then his feelings become confused. What he's really looking for is an object that he can just vent pure anger.
Whoever Jack was, he was beginning to take more and more risks with each new exploit. The ferocity of his latest attack had increased dramatically, and its very audacity gave notice of a killer with an ever greater craving for blood. The Journal, too, would have us believe that James Maybrick was on an emotional roller coaster ride to hell, and each page was bearing testimony to a tortured mind running out of control. Others were not so sure.
Well, we know what he took from Annie Chapman. The Ripper took from Annie Chapman her uterus and her bladder. I consulted butchers and a chef, and they all confirmed that it would be physically impossible to eat a uterus by simply frying it.
Cannibalism is one of the commonest aspects of sex crime. Happens again and again. I would say that one of the most interesting modern parallels with Jack the Ripper is Chikatilo, apart from Gaskins, who again is tremendously similar. And there again you have this cannibalism, slicing off pieces of flesh and chewing them, and chewing the uterus.
In favor of the manuscript, I pointed out that it does not make an issue of the coins and rings at Chapman's feet. I should have expected somebody forging a diary to have made a point of these, and he didn't.
So far, the diary had failed to make any obvious mistakes, and the M left on the torn envelope at Hanbury Street would prove to be just one of a series of remarkable coincidences. Following Annie Chapman's murder, Jack the Ripper's notoriety was assured as panic gripped London, and the Journal exposed yet another facet of the killer's personality. He loved playing games.
I have read of my deeds. They've done me proud. I had to laugh. They had me down as left-handed, a doctor, a slaughterman, a Jew. Very well. If they are to insist that I'm a Jew, then a Jew I shall be. I could not stop laughing when I read Punch. There for all to see was the first 3 letters of my surname. They're blind, as they say. It amuses me, so I shall write them a clue.
A few days after the cartoon had appeared in Punch, the Central News Agency received a letter which began, Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. And it was signed Jack the Ripper. At last, a concerned public had a chilling but compelling hook on which to hang their anxiety. But had it in fact been written by the murderer? The diary was in no doubt.
Before I am finished, all England will know the name I have given myself.
But had the author of the diary finally made a mistake? In 1910, Sir Robert Anderson, the head of the CID at the time, had gone on record saying,
I will only add here that the Jack the Ripper letter which is preserved in the Police Museum in Scotland Yard is the creation of an enterprising journalist.
It was a view echoed by other eminent police officers of the day, and now many researchers have accepted that the so-called Dear Boss letter was probably a hoax. The question was, if the diary was a hoax, why would it deliberately contradict current popular opinion?
We are getting to something that's very important, which is, I want to know, who wrote the Dear Boss letter?
Well, yes, let's be clear about this.
The debate centered on the fact that Anderson never specifically referred to the Dear Boss letter by name, but to the Jack the Ripper letter preserved at Scotland Yard. Another letter, known as the Lusk letter, had been sent to the chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, together with half a human kidney, 2 weeks after the publication of Dear Boss. And there was some evidence to suggest that this particularly sordid communication could have been the work of the journalist in question. The problem was, the Lusk letter had been in the possession of the city police, and therefore could not have been the one Anderson had been referring to. At least, that was the current position, until our researcher found a report sent by an Inspector James McWilliam to the Home Office on October 29, 1888. In this confidential document, the inspector states that the Lusk letter had been forwarded to Scotland Yard.
What we have here, at least, is an objection, which when we actually get to look at it a little bit more closely, what we see is that the journal has not made an error.
No, I challenge the fact.
Regardless of Anderson's statement, made 22 years after the events, police at the time had every reason to take this first Dear Boss letter very seriously indeed. It had informed the authorities that there would be another killing very soon, and that the killer would remove his victim's ears. 3 days later, he struck again. In 1888, number 40 Burner Street was known as the International Workers' Educational Club. On September the 30th, the events which began outside this club would give future investigators more to ponder over than any other occasion. At approximately 1:45 in the morning, Elizabeth Stride was seen being forcibly pulled into the street by a man. She resisted. The man then pushed her into the yard and yelled out "Lipski" to a witness who crossed the road and hurried past. The witness also testified that at the same time as Stride was being attacked, a second man had come out of the public house opposite. 15 minutes later, Louis Diemschutz, a patron of the club, turned his pony and cart into the yard. The animal shied to the left as if trying to avoid something. Elizabeth Stride's body lay on the ground. But this time, there were no mutilations other than a deep gash across her throat, which had severed her windpipe. Was Stride's death the result of an argument with her abusive companion earlier, or was the second man her murderer? Was her death a totally independent incident, or another Jack the Ripper murder? Of course, the writer of the diary knew exactly what had happened that night.
I cannot believe I have not been caught. I would dearly have loved to have cut the head off the damned horse and stuff it as far as it would go down the horse's throat. I had no time to rip the bitch wide. I cursed my bad luck. I believe the thrill of being caught thrilled me more than cutting the whore herself. As I write, I find it impossible to believe he did not see me.
Curiously, the journal draws our attention not only to the little-known fact that Elizabeth Stride's hair was red, but also to the possibility that she was killed with her own knife. The following night, a long, narrow-bladed knife with a keen edge was discovered in Whitechapel Road. It was caked with dry blood. Dr. Bagster Phillips gave evidence at the inquest and stated his opinion that such a knife would have inflicted the wounds on the murdered woman. The diary had once again alerted us to an important possibility that had been overlooked by modern historians, and that was just the beginning. Having been prematurely disturbed, Elizabeth Stride's killer was desperate to satisfy his lust despite the risk.
My heart felt as if it had left my body. Within my fright, I imagined my heart bounding along the street with iron desperation following it. My satisfaction was far from complete. Within a quarter of an hour, I found another dirty bitch willing to sell her wares.
An hour after Elizabeth Stride had been murdered, PC 881 Edward Watkins of the City Police passed through Mitre Square. The sight that greeted him was nothing less than diabolical. In a dark corner lay Catherine Eddowes. What had been her face was now a clownish mask of horror. Her nose and lips had been attacked with calculated ferocity. Her throat had been cut, and as in the case of Nichols and Chapman, her abdomen had been the killer's primary target. The left kidney and the uterus were missing, but there was something else.
The thrill she gave me was unlike the others. I cut deep, deep, deep. Her nose annoyed me, so I cut it off. Had a go at her eyes, left my mark.
Under each of the victim's eyes had been carved two inverted V-shaped marks. Together they formed the letter M. The killer was playing games, and so was the author of the diary. At the mortuary, the police took an inventory of Catherine Eddowes' meagre possessions, which included a red leather cigarette case. No one had ever seen any significance in this article, the only item of any real value among a pathetic collection of odds and ends. No one, that is, except one man.
He believes I will trip over, but I have no fear. I cannot redeem it here. Of this certain fact I could send him post-haste if he requests that be the case.